Eloi Eloi Lama Sabachthani. What Scripture presents for us is a real, true forsaking of the Father and the Son. Now, that's very difficult for some people to understand, especially even Christians, to understand. How can God, the Father, forsake the Son? If Jesus Christ is God, what does that mean? God can't change, God can't morph, God doesn't have emotions, God can't feel pain. My response to that is absolutely He can. And it's found right there in the cross. Now, some of you watching this may be atheists, you may be agnostics, you may be non-believers, you may even be anti-theists. In fact, you may come from other religions. And their portrait of Christianity has simply been one of narcissism, one of ego. Jesus Christ died to save me. Right? I'm accepted, I'm going to heaven. And Jesus tells you that you need to worship Him, and you need to worship Him, and you need to worship Him, and you need to worship Him solely and completely because He's God. Just because He's God. Now, whether there is any warrant to worshiping God just because He's God or not, I don't think it's anything that we really need to address or argue over. Because as Christians, that's not the story at all anyways. God's not looking at us saying, you worship me because I'm God, and you worship me because I'm God, and so forth, all in arbitrarity. Our reverence for God, our worship of God, is deserved because of what happened on the cross, what happened on Good Friday. When we say that God is dead, we really mean it. That on that day, God died. Because on that cross, this perfect man, who never sinned, somebody who was so in tune with the Father throughout his entire life, who was deity incarnated himself, took on the sin of the world. And in that moment, and here's the crucial thing, in that moment, Christ was damned to hell. Now, that is a huge statement, huge theological statement that unfortunately we don't often think about. That Christ was cursed by the sin that He took, the blame that He took, to the point where even God the Father had to turn His back on Him and not look at Him. If we think of hell not as fire and brimstone, as not a burning alive and watching worms crawl through our skin, but as simply separation from God, relationship breakage in the uttermost sense of that term, then yes, it's absolutely true. Christ went through hell. Maybe not to hell. Christ went through hell for you. This is why we call it Good Friday. Because on this day, God Himself decided to die. Jürgen Moltmann, a German theologian, wrote a book called God Crucified, which is an excellent book. Somewhat controversial, but excellent book. And he says, on the cross, Jesus and His God and Father are divided as deeply as possible through an accursed death. And yet they are most deeply one through their surrender. For Christians, here's the deal. God is a God of suffering. God is a God who feels our pain. God is a God who suffers with us, to the point that for those that allow it, Christ goes through that separation for us. Right? Christ goes through hell for us. He takes that judgment. He takes that condemnation. He received that. He received that death. He received that separation from the Father. For those that are not Christians, understand that this is what the Christian story actually says, that this is what it actually proclaims. This is the good news. It's not about Jesus just coming down and quickly dying for us and before shooting back up to heaven. It's about Christ Himself coming down and saying, listen, my purpose for being here is to go through hell. It's to encounter that separation from the Father so that you don't have to. Would you take that?